Hello everyone, this is Gene from NYC and I'm back with another video. Today's video will be dealing with Anita Sarkieesian, Melonie Mac, Lara Croft, and the difference between sexy and sexualized. So let me try to do a brief summary here of how this video came to be. So I was originally going to do a video on Anita because I saw a video on her from Yellow Flash, and Yellow Flash showed a tweet where she offers her consulting services, unsolicited mind you, she offers her consulting services to CD Projekt Red since they've been getting a lot of attention, both positive and negative, for the Cyberpunk 2077 game. And in particular, there's apparently a scene in the game where there's a nude woman in a tub, and one of the people working on the game talked about how this nude woman in the tub, it was supposed to be looked at from an artistic perspective, and address the issues that cyberpunk covers, like the sanctity versus the profanity of the human body, and the disconnect as people become more cyberized, so on, and so forth. So the person who was defending, or I guess explaining, from CD Projekt Red was explaining why this woman's nude and what artistically it's supposed to mean and represent. And so Anita, because she's Anita Sarkieesian, decides to just jump right in and offer her consulting services unannounced, unsolicited, as if we need her opinion in 2019. We didn't need her opinion in 2014, but that's something I'll get to a little bit later. So I was originally going to do a video about that, and I still might, but I scrolled down a little bit more in the Twitter feed, and I found a response, or rather a defense, I should say, of Lara Croft from a woman named Melonie Mac. And Anita, because she's Anita, decides that she's going to point out the flaw in Miss Mac's argument. So what I wanted to do was, I wanted to look at Miss Mac's argument, look at Anita's response to it, and then give my thoughts on the difference between a sexy character and the difference between a sexualized character, and if it's wrong, if it's ever inappropriate to have a hypersexualized or over-sexualized or just a sexualized female character. So first, let me read Melonie Mac, what she said. I'm going to read what Anita says, and then I'm going to give my thoughts. It's generally how it's going to work. So let me start with what Miss Mac. So Miss Mac, right, Melonie Mac, at Melonie Mac, host for GameStop TV, at Facebook Gaming, partnered streamer, Lara Croft is my hero. She gives her Discord link, she gives her business email, and as you can see, there's even a banner of Lara Croft at the top. So as she said, Lara is her hero. So I will start out by saying that I'm not expecting Miss Mac to be objective in this. She's making a defense of her favorite female character, of her hero, as she herself says in the bio here. But just because she's not being neutral or objective does not mean she doesn't have a point, or that she doesn't have a good argument or defense of classic 1990s Lara Croft. So let's actually read what she says. So here's what she says. Oftentimes, when the original Lara Croft comes up in discussion, people are quick to say that she was created for the male gaze. I'm making this thread to clear the air on this misunderstanding, which mostly comes from those who didn't play the games, to be honest. One, and then question mark. I guess you didn't know at the time how many tweets this would be. So next tweet. Thank you all so much, City Noises. Anyway, move on. Can we move on with this? Can we move on with this? Thank you, thank you. Move it, move it, move it, move it, move it, move it. Can you please move it? Can you please move it? Can we please take out the city noises? Finally, just chirping birds. Anyway, the next tweet is, when Tomb Raider was created, women lead characters were almost non-existent. The very idea of making the main protagonist a woman was a risk. At the time, we had Metroid with Samus as the lead, but what made her safe was that until the end, the player thought she was a man. With that said, Core Design didn't care about the risk and created a woman lead character anyway. Her proportions were exaggerated, not in an objectified manner, but to see even on blocky PS1 graphics that the main character was a woman, and they were proud of that. What's frustrating is when people take quite possibly the biggest woman power icon in the world and reduce her to a digital bimbo. Anyone who actually played the game saw that throughout the classic series, she was always shown in an empowering light. Here we go with the city noises again. My apologies. Never compromising on that. Lara's crazy curves were created as an exaggeration to show she, a powerful protagonist in a video game who slays T-Rexes, was all a woman. It was a bold statement for woman power, not for objectification. As female representation has become more prevalent, people forget this. Lara amassed a massive women LGBTQ+ following. Within her hardcore active communities, it's women and gay men who are the majority. For more on Lara's impact on the LGBTQ+ community, I encourage you to listen to Survivor Reborn podcast. In conclusion, Lara was created as a power fantasy and a rebel. She was rebellious herself, and the very act of creating her was unapologetically rebellious as well. She paved the way for strong women of all shapes and sizes in gaming today. Excuse me. Lara's curves are not shameful. Throwing in a receipt from Toby Gard, interview with Gamasutra in 1998, for those who think I am just making this stuff up. Lara was not created for the male gaze. Lara was not created for the male gaze, period. And this little picture reads here, it was never the intention to create some kind of page 3 girl to star in Tomb Raider. The idea was to create a female character who was a heroine, cool, collected, in control, that sort of thing. The problem with those other games is that the female characters are actually there for purely exploitative purposes. I know you could argue that Lara, with her comic book style over-the-top figure, is exploitative, but I don't agree. I think it's ridiculous to say that portraying stylized people is degrading. You can represent an over-the-top hero figure by augmenting characteristics like a jutting jaw, wide shoulders, thin waist, etc., and that is not degrading to men. It may well be a stereotype, but it seems to me that people are overanalyzing this whole thing. It's pretty simple. If women in a game are only there to be the equivalent of quiz show floozies, then they are being portrayed in a sexist way. When it comes to Galeon, there are all sorts of women in the Galeon world, just as there are all sorts of men. Now, overall, I agree with this entire argument, and I agree with what Mr. Bard said back in 1998. Though I will admit that I don't understand quite. There's a few things that are just out of context, like the problem with other video games is not clear. This is only a snippet from the magazine at the time, so I don't quite know what he's talking about there. Or this little shot about women being the equivalent of quiz show floozies. I don't know what that means. I don't understand what's wrong with female presenters and quiz shows, what issue he had with them back then. And when he comes to Galeon, when I hear Galeon, I think of ships. I think of games like Uncharted Waters. If you're not familiar with that game, It's an old school action adventure game. You get to play as a merchant, and along the way, you can earn your way, make enough money to buy a galleon ship. So that's what I think of. I'm a gamer. I think of video games when I hear things. But for the most part, I agree with what Mr. Bard said here in this magazine, this snippet of this magazine article from Gama Sutra from way back in the day. And I agree overall with Miss Mac's argument. She brings up how Lara's been embraced by the LGBTQ community. Mr. Bard himself brought up art. He brought up comic art, which I think is a big deal, because Lara is a creation of her time. She comes from 1996, 1997, I think. That was the age of the 90s anti-hero. If you're familiar with comics, you know that everybody in comics was big. It was bright, it was colorful. If you want to talk about female comic characters, you can look at characters like Silver Sable or Domino, and no doubt many others. They had these very exaggerated bodies. It was big hair, big boobs, big guns, because it was the 1990s. And all of that was considered a visual display of power and strength. 90s art, 90s comic art, 90s video game art was very exaggerated in general, right? You can even look back at the Street Fighter II movie back in the day, and how that art style ended up influencing the rest of the games, right? Just art back then, pop culture art, comic art, video game art, was very hyper masculine and was very hyper feminine, and we had no issue with it. We didn't mind. We didn't care. We liked it. So that's all I have to say about that. So again, with the exception of I don't quite understand what she means when she talks about Metroid and how Samus was safe, but that's an argument for another day. But overall, I think Miss Mac makes a very strong defense of Lara and of what the intent was at the time. So, because she's Anita Sarkieesian and she must opine where no one asked her to, Anita decides to respond by saying this. It says, "This argument is deeply flawed. Let me tell you why." And the next one reads, "Just because creating a female hero was a risk doesn't mean that she had to be sexualized. Just because marginalized people found joy in the only female option doesn't make her any less sexualized. Just because she was powerful in the narrative doesn't make her any less sexualized. You can like the games, you can play the games, you can be a fan of the games. The games can have had a positive impact on your life, but Lara Croft was designed specifically to be a sexualized object in order to appeal to," I think she writes make players here. I'm assuming she means male players. So I'll read it as male players. She was a sexualized object in order to appeal to male players. I think that's what she's saying here. She is the definition of male gaze. These types of arguments, intentional or not, perpetuate the status quo by making excuses for sexism. You can like whatever the hell you want, but don't pretend water isn't wet. So here's my response to this. Anita doesn't present an argument here, or a rebuttal, or anything of that sort. She simply asserts that Lara was sexualized, and that the fact that she was embraced by women or the LGBTQ community, or the fact that she was powerful in the narrative, doesn't change the fact that she was sexualized. Problem is, Anita doesn't show where Lara was sexualized. Where is this overtly sexualized character? She never shows it, she never explains it. Her response to Miss Mac's multi-tweet post where she goes into detail from many things. Again, she pulls an article featuring Tony Bard, who mentions comic art. She herself mentions how she was embraced, how Laura was embraced by different communities, and all this other stuff. And all Anita can say, all she can respond with is, well, she was sexualized and there's nothing you can change. Doesn't change the fact that she was made for the straight male player, which is Anita's response to everything. And this is why I have a very strong dislike for Anita. She never actually defends her arguments or makes a rebuttal. She just says it is what it is and this is what it is, as if it's a foregone conclusion or widely accepted that Lara Croft was a sexualized character. That's not the case. I think it's a widely accepted that she's a very sexy character and very popular. I'll give you that. But it is by no means decided upon whether or not Lara is a sexualized character. And plus, I will always bear a grudge against Anita because in one of her Tropes vs. Women videos, she mischaracterizes the boss of Metal Gear Solid 3. She takes one clip of her where the boss had her suit unzipped at the end of the game. If you're familiar with the game, if you're familiar with Metal Gear Solid 3, then you know which scene I'm talking about, and you know that's actually fan disservice when the boss unzips her sneaking suit. But Anita Sarkieesian took this, and she decided that she was going to mischaracterize, and I would say she flat out lied, but I guess the official statement would be that she mischaracterized the boss as being a bimbo when the boss has never been that. I am still of the opinion to this day that either Anita or somebody in her group, when they were thinking to involve Metal Gear Solid characters, mistook the boss for Sniper Wolf. I mean, they look just alike, right? I mean, they're both blonde, they're both female, they both have boobs, they both show off those boobs at the same time. I mean, they're, at some point I should say. I mean, it's not like they're any different. I mean, one's American, one is Serbian, one is the linchpin to the entire series, one is a boss that appears twice in the game and doesn't really serve much of a narrative purpose outside of being the boss twice in the game. One, it's her legacy that Big Boss and Major Zero and others are fighting over and how best to honor her sacrifice. The other is a lost soul who fell in with Big Boss and considers him her savior. But yeah, they are totes just alike Anita, aren't they? They're just the same. So anyhow, let me get into what I think the difference between sexy and sexualized is. Damn it, I hate city noises. Anyway, to me, the difference between sexy and sexualized is that one is more overt, more in your face, right? And is designed to be sexual in nature. To me, that's sexualized. When a character is designed to be sexual in nature, when everything about them, their look, their behavior, their role in the story, is meant to invoke sexual thoughts and feelings. Whereas the other one is simply being attractive. Anybody, can be sexy. If someone finds you sexy, then to them you are sexy, right? Sexy is subjective, right? And it's basically based in being aesthetically pleasing, right? You don't necessarily have to be dressed like a stripper, for example, to be perceived as sexy. For example, I'll use the example of Ivy and Taki from the Soul series of games. Ivy, obviously, is very sexualized. Her look is very sexual in nature. Her win quotes, her attack quotes are very sexual, right? She obviously has a dominatrix theme to her. Dominatrix, again, that is a reference to a sexual subculture. Everything about her makes you think of sex in some frame or fashion. Now I want to be clear. I'm not saying Ivy's a bad character or that she's a cheap character or just a sex doll or anything of that nature. I don't think those things of her at all. I'm just saying that to my perspective, given that Ivy's character is overtly sexual and pretty much everything about her, at least in her look, her win quotes, her moves and whatnot, is related to being a dom, right? There's obviously a strong sexual component to her character. We're supposed to see her in a sexual light, is basically what I'm trying to say. And her sexual display is how she displays her power, is how she exerts her power. And that's fine. But that, to me, makes her hypersexualized. Again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm just saying this is how I see it. Whereas you compare this to, say, Taki from the same series of games. Taki is a very sexy-looking character, no doubt about it. She has an incredible figure, very pretty face. Nobody would ever say Taki is unattractive. That being said, Taki as a character is not overtly sexual. For example, outside of wearing the skin-tight ninja suit, right? The costume in and of itself, outside of being skin-tight, is not overtly sexual. It doesn't, how do I put it? I don't want to say it doesn't show off her breasts because it does, because it's skin-tight. But, for example, there's no boob window in the outfit. There's no strategic holes in the outfit. With the exception of perhaps that one throw Taki has, where she sort of like wraps her leg around the opponent's head. She kind of like traps the opponent's neck in like the bend of the knee, and then she takes her dagger and slashes their throat. Outside of that one throw, none of Taki's attacks are overtly sexual, right? Sex is not a theme. It's not a dominant theme with her. Her dominant theme as a character is ninja. She's a ninja. She looks like a ninja. She fights like a ninja. Everything about her screams ninja, 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 ninja. And I want to be clear, it's ninja, not kunoichi. I know some are going to say, technically because she's a female ninja, she's a kunoichi. I understand what they're saying, but I disagree with it because the kunoichi are all about using their looks. They're all about playing on their sexuality and playing on their femininity. Damn city noises. Oh, God. Anyway, as I was saying, they were all about playing on their femininity and playing on their sexuality to get information. Taki doesn't do that. Taki is truly a female ninja. Right? She presents herself and she fights just like any other male ninja in a video game would. She's not, say, Mai from KOF. If she were like Mai from King of Fighters, I would say, okay, she's a sexualized character. But she's not. Mai is a kunoichi, Taki is a female ninja. That's the way I view it. So to me, there is your difference between sexualized and sexy. One, the sex and sexuality is a theme, it is thematic, it is an essential part of the character. And the other one is they're good looking, people find them attractive, but sex is not an overt theme with them. That's the best way I can summarize it. And something else I want to make clear is that I don't think there's anything wrong with a sexualized or a hypersexualized or over-sexualized character. Take, for example, Mileena from the Mortal Kombat games, right? Mileena's always been hypersexual. She got more sexual and more sexy looking as the games went on, but her role in the story has always been to be the dark, shadow, twisted version of Kitana, right? So she's dark, she's twisted, she's the femme fatale. She's overtly sexual, as anybody who's ever played Mortal Kombat, especially MK3 on, is aware. Do I think that this is bad, that she's a sexualized and actually over-sexualized? I mean, she was in Playboy. Over-sexualized character? No, not at all. Because it fits the character. It makes sense for Melina to be over-sexualized. So it does not bother me. So long as it makes sense for the character, most themes are not going to bother me. But to me, there is a clear difference between sexy and sexualized. Same way that, for example, in comic art in the 1990s, or just art in general in the 1990s, there was a strong emphasis on hypermasculinity and hyperfemininity. That was not necessarily overly sexual or sexualized. It was exaggerating the prominent physical features that make men and women stand out, right? Big chest, big arms, big legs, big hair. So there's a difference between hyper or exaggerated femininity and masculinity. There's a difference between that. There's a difference between a character being sexualized, and there's a difference between a character being sexy. These are all separate things. Now they can blend and bleed into each other, sure, they all do, but they are not the same. So those are my thoughts on the matter. I hope that I made a good argument. And just to be clear, I have no issue with old school Lara. I think she's a fine character. I remember back in the day when I used to collect GamePro magazine, all the boys were always asking me for any issue or anything involving Lara. So I'm not going to act as if, Lara was never meant to appeal to a young teen audience. Of course she was. But that doesn't mean that she's a bad character because she was appealing to a certain demographic. Doesn't mean she was a sex doll. Doesn't mean she was sexualized. She was never presented in games, at least as far as I know, as an overtly sexual character. She was a rebel. She was the Tomb Raider, right? She kills dinosaurs and lions and tigers and bears and all this other stuff. She was presented as an over-the-top 1990s action hero. And these days, she's presented as video games version of what's her name? Katniss Everdeen, I think, of the Hunger Games. Right? So, regardless, she's still supposed to be an action hero. And when you're an action hero, certain things are going to be emphasized about you. In particular, your upper body. Men have big pecs, women have big boobs. This is the art style of the action genre. Learn to live with it. Quit crying. That's basically all I have to say about it. So I am firmly on the side of Miss Mac here. I thought she made a great argument in defense of Lara, in defense of basically 90s art styles of the day. And as usual, Anita doesn't have a real answer. Her answer is basically, I think it's sexualized, so it's sexualized. No, honey, you need to do more to actually prove your point than just assert that it's true. So anyway, that's my thoughts on this very, very, very long video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.